Welcome to the Practical Church Revitalization Podcast with our co-hosts Don McKinnon and Eric Malloy, where we look at church revitalization in real time.
Hey everybody, it's Don McKinnon from the Practical Church Revitalization Podcast, and I just wanted to send this out because during this recording of this podcast, we recorded close to 2 hours of discussion. We just decided that it would be best to divide this into 3 separate podcasts. So, hope you enjoy this. Hope this finds you. Hope it really informs you on different things going on. It's supposed to be the 10 trends or 10 movements within church revitalization right now. Just what we're calling the Millennial answer.
Social.
Yeah.
And friendly. So, hopefully that didn't sound too bad. I love you guys.
Once you get to know him, he's a big softy. Anyway, so I guess now we'll go to number 4, which is we've teased this in another episode. It's what we're calling the Millennial answer. Now, for those of you that are wondering what is the Millennial answer, you might be saying to yourself, well, aren't the Millennials leaving the churches? And, you know, there are the nuns, as they call them, N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S. That would be a different thing altogether. But the Millennials, these are the people that have stayed in church, that 2 to 3 out of every 10 that have stayed in church, They are like leaving certain churches. I'm trying to watch my words here. They are leaving certain churches, and it's sort of a good sign for revitalizations, because revitalizations at the heart, revitalizations are teaching at a deeper level than some other churches. And what do we mean by that is because a lot of discipleship is being done from the pulpit.
You know, I have a tendency to rant and to get frustrated, and you really haven't made it easy for me on this episode. Like, this is like low hanging fruit. I'm a baseball guy. I mean, this is like you're tossing me grapefruits here, and it's hard not to. It's hard not to take it. I think I'm actually going to take it on this one, though. Like, I'm actually going to take it. So I might
have to get the taser out.
I might cap a few folks here. But I grew up in the South. I know I don't really have much of that twang left. My parents are from the Midwest, so I just grew up there. But the trend that came out of that as I was a teenager in the 90s was that church growth movement. And actually, I would say it actually started more in the 80s. It is a good reflection of the baby boomer generation. You know, my parents' age, probably your folks' age, like that. You know, born from, in that big era where, they were hippies for a while, and then they hit the 80s. With kind of the me generation, bigger, better, serve me, love me, take care of me. You know, I kind of think of that. And then you get that church growth movement that really reflects that. You know, you get the seeker sensitive, the, preach to the felt needs. And you're saying, and I get where you're coming from, so this is our cool dynamic, is that you do a good job of being more tactful. But you see that, and I think as a younger Gen Xer, like I'm in that, I don't know if you read that, somebody wrote, there's that micro-generation, the Xennials, which I think we're both... Zennials, which I think we're both part of.
I'm an Xer.
Okay.
I'm 73, so
I'm on the border.
You and my wife and your wife are Zennials.
We're Zennials. We're on the border, so we're not quite Gen Xers, but we're not quite... Millennials. So, though I'm at the older end of Zennials, or the tail end of Gen Xers. But... we grew up in that. We grew up around that more kind of thing. And I think a lot of folks in our age group, that doesn't really resonate. it doesn't really speak to us so much. I mean, as Gen Xers, it's the joke is that we hang around the coffee shops and whined and complained and hated the world. Whereas millennials tend to be a little more, on the bright side. I think that's definitely my where I get a Gen X one is I tend to be a little more, doom and gloom. But so we see that. So we see, I think a lot of what we're seeing here is the bounce back to the church growth movement.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? Is you have the church growth movement, which is very, very man-centered, very felt needs, very, and there's a shallowness to it. Like I don't mind. I mean, I'll say it. I don't care if it hurts people's feelings. There's a shallowness to that, right? If you preach to my felt needs, well, what happens when you preach 5 steps for a better marriage, and it doesn't work? Mm-hmm. Then I go, well, what's the next conclusion I make? Well, if you're saying from the pulpit, these are the 5 ways to fix my marriage, and I went home and I did them, and it doesn't work, then Jesus doesn't work.
Right.
And to me, that's the issue, is that we start combining pop culture and pop psychology with the gospel, and they're not the same thing. So I think when we see this millennial answer is that millennials are looking for something bigger than three steps to fix your budget, 5 steps to a healthier marriage, 4 ways to battle depression. You know what I mean? They're looking for more than that. And I think the rise of the nuns, Ed Stetzer wrote a great article about this a few years ago, is the nuns have always been there.
Yep.
It's the squishy middle of evangelicalism, of people who never really bought in anyways.
And the thing is, too, is that we have, like, what was it, last year or late 2016, we had that article come out where it basically announced we're in a post-Christian age.
Yeah.
There are now more people that identify as agnostic or atheist than there are Christians.
But identify, I would say the percentage of people hasn't really changed.
No, and that's the thing. We have always, because we called America a Christian nation, this is what, in truth, and I mean, go back into history, and this is coming from a person that loves history, drives my wife crazy watching history stuff, but you go back to the Founding Fathers, and everybody will sit there and go, oh, Jefferson was a Christian, Adams was a Christian, Paine was a Christian. Look at them. They were deists.
Right.
All right?
Right.
They believed in God, but their idea of God is not what we would say is the true biblical understanding of who God is.
Well, the famous Jefferson Bible. See, he went with a razor and cut out the parts that he thought didn't make sense. And so the rise of the nuns is just really people calling themselves what they really are.
Yes.
What they always have been. And that is practical atheists, practical agnostics. While they might attend church, they when they leave your service at whatever time you end, God ceases to be important to them. Mm-hmm. And they basically would say, well, I go to church and I live a good moral life. Therefore, I'm a Christian. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's, as we look at the millennial answer, which, maybe this would be a good episode for the future as we've dived into this hard.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the bounce back to that.
Right. And I mean, the thing is, too, though, is the millennials that are staying in the churches, they are looking for those deeper, because a lot of these nuns are their friends. They're their peers. They're their coworkers, their family, their friends. And so they want to dive deeper into theology. They look at, what's being taught from the pulpit. And I've seen it where there are pastors that sit there and say, oh, don't give me this cockamamie crap story on this. They're sitting there, because they get offended that people, that there is a generation that is calling them out. Mm-hmm. And that's what it is. They're calling them out. And they are going to, one thing that this millennial answer is doing, they are going to the revitalizations, they're going to the smaller churches, because there is a deeper gospel being preached from the pulpit. They're growing, they're getting their answers, they're getting fed. It goes back into, we're going to pull out the Bible here. Goes back to, I just realized this is the one that I have because I left my Bible at home for my sermon, that I had to remark this one up. But, throughout the Bible, we read about spiritual milk, spiritual meat.
Right.
Paul and Peter both talk the same thing. They talk about how there are people that, they want more, but they're on spiritual milk. They can't grow because they're really not past spiritual milk. Well, we're talking about a generation that's sitting there saying, you know what, you're drowning me in this spiritual milk. And the writer of Hebrews, he kind of gets this into this deeper thing, because he's like, this is now 5:12 in the book of Hebrews. He says, for though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the basic principles of the oracles of God. You need milk, not solid food, for everyone who lives on milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, since he is a child. But solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. And so when you hear these pastors that are sitting there and they're saying, oh, they got a Bible, they can, but that's the thing. If you're you go into Peter and Paul, and they're saying some of you should be leaders by now.
Right.
Right. But because of the way that these churches are working, they're not choosing the millennials. They're not even choosing Gen Xers or even boomers or builders, because, there's still a builder generation.
Right. There still is, yeah, you're right.
They're not choosing them because they're not fitting the plan to become the leadership that they have. God's designed everybody for a certain thing. Paul gets into that in Ephesians when he's talking about how he gives apostles and evangelists and shepherds and teachers to build up the church for every good work. And that's the thing that's going on in the church today, is you do have these millennials now that are sitting there, and we treat them. And I'll say we, as a collective, capital C church, we treat, or the way that we're told is we treat everybody the same, is if everybody has a tough time understanding. But you as a teacher, you know this. Here in Massachusetts, we have a test that you have to pass to get your degree, which is the MCAS test. And it's not what it was when you and I graduated. I mean, granted, you graduated in another state.
Right.
But even so, in other states, they are doing similar tests. So the generation that's coming up, Gen Z as it's called right now, they are so far more than what you and I were in high school. They're so far more than what millennials were in high school. And I know the people are going to be saying the Tide Pod thing, but forget the Tide Pod thing for a second. Think about this. We're talking about a generation that's coming up that we have been training and teaching and trying to compete with the world. They're not on the same level. We're telling them how important college is. We're telling them how important an education is. They're getting that. If you were to go back to when you graduated high school and had your teenage 18-year-old self go up against the questions that they have to answer, they're going to pass and you're going to fail.
Well, not only that, but think about this. So I'm a high school teacher. I teach STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. And so, we teach kids higher order thinking. Like I teach an engineering class, and how it's designed, I'm designed to facilitate an engineering class that freshmen in high school can solve complex problems, use 3D modeling software that they have to figure out basically on their own. That's how the instructors taught me to teach this class. Is it's designed to be very student-centered. That's like the whole concept of education right now, as opposed to when you and I were in school, when the teacher just stood up and talked for 45 minutes, gave you your homework, and you were done. Mm-hmm. We're not supposed to do that anymore. We're supposed to talk and then make the kids learn on their own, especially honors kids like where I teach. So let's track on this for a second. Let's follow this for a minute. So we teach kids higher order thinking. We teach them how to write research papers, how to do all this other kind of stuff when they're 8th and 9th graders. But then we go, well, they can't understand something like penal substitutionary atonement. That's too deep of a concept for them. But it's not. The problem is we lower the bar so much, and we dumb these kids down so much. And not even kids, millennials, Gen Xers, we dumb it down because we go, oh man, you can't get this. I mean, listen, man, I went to Bible college, I went to seminary, like I've got this, but I have to lower it for you. Come on, like it is ridiculous that we would treat people like that. Listen, we talk about those things. Yes, I use words, penal substitutionary atonement. I propitiation, like I talk about those during our service. I define them, and then we go to community group, and how our community group works is we kind of flesh out the sermon topic a little bit more, or the sermon passage a little more. And I have people who grasp these big theological concepts, who ask questions, who want to know more about God. We offered a hermeneutics class for our church. Those of you who don't know what hermeneutics is, it's the proper study of the Bible. I had 6 people sign up and sit through the entire semester, do homework, write papers, to learn more about how to properly understand the Bible. So listen, there is a hunger for that. I mean, if people are truly believers, they want to know more. They want the meat. They want to grow and to know more and to understand Jesus at a much deeper level than I think oftentimes in recent history in the church that we've done.
Right.
You know, we've done more pithy, more cute, like how do we be entertaining kind of thing. And I mean, God hasn't called me to be an entertainer. I mean, God's called me to preach the Bible and to lead people to follow Him more. And you talk about millennials. Let me brag on my worship leader. He's 21. He's 21, just turned 21. I would say his thirst for knowledge and his understanding of big, deep concepts in the Bible is further along than we have of some folks who've been in church for 30, 40 years, who are in their 50s and 60s. Because he there's a direction. Now, of course, part of it's, personality and all of that, but part of it is that's what these kids do, and they grab hold of it, and it's less of an idea of I come to church to be fed, and more of an idea of wanting to engage, to be part of what's happening, to be part of what's going on, and to grow spiritually, and to see that. And then also think about, man, if you're a 21-year-old kid, you go to a large church like that, it's hard. You're going to just kind of fall through the cracks.
Yep. You
know what I'm saying? Like, how do you engage? How do you do something where you feel like you matter? I'm not saying, hey, you have to be up on stage, attention seeker, whatever. I mean, I'm not, but how do you get involved? You go to a small church, and maybe that's part of the attraction. You go to a small church, and you can engage, you can be involved. Your pastor personally. He might even be willing to give you his phone number, as opposed to when you have 1,000 people in your church. You have to, as a pastor, you have to be a little more guarded.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? And so maybe there's some of that as well.
Well, there's also when it comes to this, part of it is that in these larger churches, they're a lot of the millennials are becoming first-time parents.
Right.
And they're sitting there and they look at, like, I hate to say it, but what's gone on in churches,
right,
with sex abuse and stuff, and they're like, you know what, I'm a parent now. This is my child, and so they want to go somewhere that's smaller. They want to go somewhere where they're going to get to know the person. If you're going to take care of my kids, I don't want to be a number. I want to know who's taking care of my kids. And that's really one of the hard answers to this.
Now hear us on this, though. We're not saying that large churches are bad.
No.
Large are great. Large churches have things that you and I don't. They have resources, money, people.
If it wasn't for some of the large churches out there, Sutton, First Baptist Sutton wouldn't have some of the stuff that we have right now.
Right. So I grew up in a mega church. Like a good friend and I were talking about this the other day. I grew up in a mega church. My youth group had 150 kids on Wednesday nights. So I don't want it to sound like that, or that small churches are the only way to go and that people should abandon being. No. Go to church where you can plug in, where you can serve, where you can be part of a community, and that you can grow spiritually and like wherever that is. If it's a big church, it's a big church. If it's a small church, it's a small church. We're simply just talking about the movements that are happening. right? Or identifying the movements. Now, mind you, there's plenty of small churches that preach very poor, very shallow.
Right.
So like, I don't want to come off as saying that all small churches are doctrinally and theologically deep and all large churches are shallow. That's not the case.
No,
Like, it's across the board.
Yeah, and when we're talking about our small churches or the small churches that are seeing the fruit of this, it's the revitalization churches, which has realized they need to be deeper.
Right.
There are still many dying churches out there where, the old saying is it's a mile wide and a penny deep.
Right.
That's where their theology is,
and I think that's the one where the pushback comes. It's almost like that shotgun concept. If we just throw enough out there, we're going to get everybody. And that's, is it I think with them, what we're saying is the millennials aren't looking for, an inch deep and a mile wide. That's not, and to me, that's what I'm saying when I talk about like the church growth movement. I don't mean by the size of your church. You know what I'm saying? There's some phenomenally deep, large churches, the Village Church, which we talk about a lot.
Yeah.
The Redeemer. There's some good ones out there.
Yeah, Bethel Church, Baptist Church. I want to pray. John Piper's old church. That's
Right.
the one we're talking
Right.
about.
They're
the
large
church.
churches with a big reach, but who are very deep theologically, who preach Jesus, who preach the Bible, who disciple people. That's what we're talking about. Whether you're a church of 20 or a church of 2,000, make sure you plug in somewhere that does that. Now we're saying that the movement towards these millennials who are saying, listen, I want to know people, I want to know my pastor, I want to know. We're just saying that that's a movement. I'm not saying that's the only movement. I'm not saying that that's not the case. What we're saying is we're just recognizing that. We just kind of ran in a minute, and I don't want it to sound like we're not crushing all large churches here.
Yeah, we're not picking. Like we said, we have friends in network churches. We have friends across the board. We love them. We don't doubt their sincerity of faith, but we're just here to point out what's going on within the church world, whatever you want to call it. These are little things that are happening that even last year, speaking of conferences, I was at a conference for church growth where Carrie Newhoff spoke and Larry Osborne, and both of them pointed a lot of these points out too, that this is the trend that's happening, that they're seeing, that others are seeing, and it's just going to go somewhere. We don't know where, but right now, smaller churches are the ones that are reaping the benefits. So if you're on a church revitalization, you're going to be building, probably getting some of that fruit or some of that transfer growth, I guess we'll call it, that's healthy, because you're going to get people in there that want to grow. And if you're struggling trying to find leaders, these will be the people that you can disciple and build up into the leadership that you need to help your church come back to life.
Right. So let's when we move that. Another one is church plants looking for a building. It's we talked about this in an earlier podcast. It's tough, where I'm at in the greater Boston area. Cities aren't going to let a church buy a multi-million-dollar piece of property in a building and not pay taxes on it.
Right.
I mean, it's not entirely legal to do that, but I mean, there's loopholes to everything, and so it's a movement that oftentimes these dying churches gift or merge or plant. Gift or merge to a church plant. In order to kind of continue that, which we're both fans of. I mean, let's be honest. Like I'm a fan of that. Listen, if you're a pastor struggling with 10 or 15 people who are, in your church is aging very quickly, look to partner and look to connect with a young church plant. I mean, that to me, I think that's huge.
Yep.
What a better way to reclaim the glory of your church to the glory of God than to see something like that happen.
And on that, I'm thinking, I've mentioned Mark Driscoll on an earlier podcast, but National Community Church was a church that pretty much was, they're multi-site. I don't think they have more than 1,000 people actually, but they're multi-site, and they do a good way of it. I think Batterson preaches 3 on and then 1 off, and it's the campus pastors that preach. But the reason why I'm bringing them up is because on this there was a church in. I can't think of the section of D.C., but it's where the Navy Yard is. And they were gifted that church's property. Now, up until that point, Batterson, the main campus, if you want to call it that, of National Community, was meeting at Ebenezer's Coffee House in D.C. And they have like this little space, probably about the size of a fellowship hall, a small fellowship hall. And they were gifted this property that this other church had, which was a movie theater from 1927, I think.
Oh, wow.
And so my wife and I, we ended up going, right after my father passed away, we went to D.C. To get away on a weekend. And we decided we were going to go check out the church. And of course, I didn't get to hear Batterson preach live. It was his brother-in-law who's the campus pastor of the main church. But he was good. I got to say that, a lot of people put the celebrity pastors. Joel Schmidl, I think was his name. He actually preached a sermon that we needed to hear. God knew it. That's awesome. We heard the sermon we needed to hear. But we got to go into that new building that they had gotten, and it was a beautiful theater. It was beautifully restored, and it was something that this previous church that had owned it, they went elsewhere. They went to an area that they knew that they could minister to and be a blessing to, but they had blessed National Community by giving them a true 24/7 facility that would be used for preaching.
Right. Which is nice. I mean, we've kicked around ideas of some things to try, and that's the benefit of having a facility, is that if we wanted to try something new or do something, we don't have to pay extra rent. Mm-hmm. We already have the facility. So it is something nice. So I think that's a good spot to end for.
Yeah. Well, we might even I think the Millennial answer might actually give us a third episode,
right,
in and of itself. So, all right. The Practical Church Revitalization podcast is sponsored by Overseed. Overseed's vision is to see growing historic churches in every New England town reaching their communities for Christ. If you want to be part of a mentorship program and you live in the New England area, please go to overseed.org and find out how you can get in contact with one of the hub churches in the area or one of the many pastoral network cohorts that are run in the area. Once again, go to overseed.org for more information on the Overseed Network.